Hello, welcome to Newscentre. I'm Parikshit Luthra. Janet Yellen pinched friendshoring to India on her first official visit to the country as U.S. Treasury Secretary. The meeting comes days ahead of India taking up the presidency of the G20. Yellen met Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and said that economic and financial ties were a crucial part of the Indo-US partnership. The Finance Minister said that the meeting will lend vigor to economic ties between the nations. Let's listen in to Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman when she was meeting Janet Yellen, and also excerpts and pictures of Janet Yellen's visit to the Microsoft headquarters in Noida.
Our meeting today will lend greater vigor to our economic relationship, strengthen business-to-business links, and facilitate coordinated policy stance to address the pressing global economic challenges. The 9th meeting of the EEFP is also being held against the backdrop of India preparing to assume the G20 presidency.
At a time when the United States is focused on countering the economic consequences of the Ukraine-Russia war and China's dominance over supply chains, the country's Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, made an important visit to India. Yellen started her day with a 90-minute visit to Microsoft's India headquarters, interacting with industry leaders and software engineers. In her remarks to the press, she lashed out at President Putin and said that stopping the war would be the best thing for the global economy.
Take Russian energy exports. Russia has long presented itself as a reliable energy partner. But for the better part of this year, Putin has weaponized Russia's natural gas supply against the people of Europe. It's an example of how malicious actors can use their market positions to try to gain geopolitical leverage or disrupt.
The Treasury Secretary referred to friendshoring 6 times in her 20-minute speech, outlining the U.S. strategy to secure supply chains and diversifying them beyond China.
Or disrupt trade for their own gain. The United States is pursuing an approach called friendshoring to diversify away from countries that present geopolitical and security risks to our supply chain. To do so, we're proactively deepening economic integration with trusted trading partners like India. Our strategy will also create redundancies in our supply chain to mitigate over-concentration risks.
Referring to democratic values more than 10 times in her speech, Yellen said that democracies are at an inflection point.
We're living at a critical time for the cause of freedom around the world. Democracies require our constant attention and nurturing. It's important for all democracies to renew our commitment to civil liberties and human rights, including for all our minorities at home and abroad.
Yellen highlighted that U.S. will work closely with India in the G20 for meaningful debt relief, addressing the climate crisis, making cross-border payments cheaper, and reducing frictions to the flow of data. Secretary Yellen said that India-US ties are strong and will only deepen over time. Her message was very clear that US would like to vigorously pursue economic integration with India, and India is a critical partner for implementing the US vision on secure and reliable supply chains. With video journalist Rajinder from the Microsoft headquarters in Noida, this is Parikshit Luthra. All right, let's open this up. We're joined by Meera Shankar, former Indian ambassador to the United States, Jayant Dasgupta, former Indian ambassador to the World Trade Organization, also with us. Ambassador Meera Shankar, there we had Secretary Yellen speaking about friendshoring, saying that we need to counter countries like Russia, which are weaponizing trade, weaponizing energy. We need to stop over-reliance on China, need to form an alliance of friendly, like-minded countries. How can this be done? And how seriously would the US be pursuing this with India?
Well, if you look at what the Quad has decided, amongst the areas they want to take action on is the new Indo-Pacific economic framework. And the second is, reliability of critical supply chains. So both these aspects really are very much a part of the Quad agenda. Now, how seriously will it be implemented? I think we have to wait and see, but we are already seeing that, for instance, Apple has moved quite a bit, or at least a certain percentage of its manufacturing to India, with all its subcontractors having set up manufacturing facilities in India and now also exporting from India. So there is a window of opportunity for India to try and build itself as an alternative, because all countries are interested in de-risking monopoly supply chains, which can get disrupted either because of things like the pandemic, as we saw earlier, or because of geopolitical animosities. So this emphasis by the US on friendshoring and by Janet Yellen on friendshoring is something that would benefit India if we are able, in practical terms, both countries, to ensure that this doesn't remain at the level of rhetoric, but we actually work to try and concretize specific deals in specific sectors. And I think that's the challenge for both countries.
That's an important point, Ambassador Shankar. Let me get in Ambassador Dasgupta at this point. Ambassador Dasgupta, would the US be urging India to join a trade partnership such as the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework? Would you see any concrete measures arising out of this discussion today on friendshoring, forming a friendly alliance?
I think Janet Yellen has made it quite clear that the US would like India to be a part of the IPEF trade framework, of which India now has observer status only. And she has linked it up with this concept of friendshoring, that this secure supply chain with Asia, on which in which the US will also participate. This will be the core intention of the US in having this Indo-Pacific economic framework up and going. So that is that goes without saying. As far as having a larger free trade agreement with the US is concerned, she has not expressed any views on that. But as is commonly known, the US is quite keen to have a free trade agreement with India because it has one with Japan already, it has one with Australia, it has one with Korea, and amongst the large economies in the Indo-Pacific, India is the only one which is still not integrated, so to say, economically to the same extent as Japan and Korea and Australia and Singapore and the other ASEAN countries are. So that would be very much of a piece with the US's thinking, especially in view of the geopolitical risks that the global economy is facing, and the US economy in particular is facing, because of China's dominance of the supply chain, because it is occupying such a position that it can control the supply chains for a very large number of industries.
Right. Ambassador Meera Shankar, coming back to you on the question of Russia. So Russia came up several times during her 20-minute speech. She said that this should be the single biggest priority for world leaders, and this would be the best thing to save the global economy if we're able to stop Putin's war against Ukraine. How do you think this would have unfolded in the meeting with Nirmala Sitharaman ahead of her visit? There were also a talk about how US might emphasize or urge India to accept a price cap on Russian oil.
Well, I think, we have made our position on this fairly clear, that we will buy oil based on our own advantage, and that the oil that we buy is far less than the oil and gas, say, for instance, that Europe or China buy from Russia. So I think that's an issue on which we are still engaged with the United States, though the United States has made clear that India has not violated any sanctions in its energy purchases from Russia. Secondly, I would say that we entirely agree with the sentiment expressed by Janet Yellen that the best way to end this kind of price that the whole world is paying in terms of higher energy costs, higher food costs as a result of the conflict in Ukraine is to have talks for settling or resolving issues and bringing about an end to the conflict. That is actually what India has been urging since day one. And more recently, we have seen that National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has been in touch with his Russian counterpart and has also nudged President Zelensky not to rule out negotiations completely. And so if we see what is happening in the US, that the Republicans could, we don't know as yet for certain, but they could take control of the House, maybe even the Senate, though the Senate could go also for the Democrats. It's hanging in the balance. Then we are likely to see pressure build up for more questions about military aid and economic aid to Ukraine at this juncture, when the US economy itself is facing high pressures from inflation. So hopefully things move ahead towards negotiations. And what I can say is that we entirely agree with Janet Yellen that if we can find a way to end this conflict through negotiations and diplomatic dialogue, then that would be the best way forward for the world to resolve some of the extreme economic problems that it is facing today.
Right. Ambassador Dasgupta, on the question of democracy, we were looking at the speech.
If I may also just add caveat to what Ambassador Dasgupta says, and that is that the US would like greater economic integration with India and India participating in the India-Pacific Economic Framework, but there is absolutely no appetite for free trade agreements in the US. You saw President Trump walk out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and nobody in the US, neither the Democrats nor the Republicans, are putting any free trade agreements on the agenda as a matter of priority today. In fact, the mood is, swinging in the opposite direction, that, as Trump used to say, other countries have taken a free ride through these free trade agreements with the US, et cetera, et cetera. So the mood is certainly not for free trade agreements right now.
Okay. Coming back to the G20 focus, Ambassador Dasgupta, what do you think will be the key priorities? Here you had Janet Yellen speaking about a debt restructuring framework, saying how China has made sure that this restructuring framework, which had been agreed upon previously at G20, has not been able to work effectively, about the need to surge ahead with the climate agenda, strengthening multilateral institutions. So what do you think will be the priority when US and India start working together on the G20 during India's presidency?
As far as Janet Yellen is concerned, the US has mentioned debt restructuring for the poor and middle-income countries, which are facing this double headwind in terms of inflation, in terms of high food and oil prices, etc. So this community framework, in which China has not really participated or cooperated of the G20, which was moving in this direction. The US would like India to take the leadership of the G20 on this point and provide relief to the poor and the middle income countries which are reeling under this debt burden. That is point one. The second issue is about climate change. Now, as we speak, the talks are going on in Sharm el-Sheikh, and there is a confrontation between the developing and the developed countries about the costs which the poorer countries or the developing countries have had to bear because of climate change. And as we all know, the $100 billion fund, which was supposed to be set up primarily on through the contributions of developed countries for transfer of technology, that has also not really seen the light of the day. The contributions have been very little, far, far lower than expectations. So there is this dilemma. The US would like India to take the leadership. There have been talks that India and China must also contribute to whatever economic costs the poorer countries have borne, and to compensate for that. But that, I think, has not really been grabbing the headlines yet. So we have to keep our ears to the ground and watch as to which way the COP meeting decisions are going. The third issue on G20,
Dasgupta,
where I think
I'll
there
have
would
to
be
leave it there,
this.
sir. I'll have to leave it there. Yeah, we've run out of time, unfortunately, Ambassador Dasgupta, but thank you for joining us. We'd like to thank Ambassador Meera Shankar as well. We have to take a short break at this point, but when we return, we will get you more news and updates when we return on travel and tourism as well.